Burkina Faso has just handed a giant gold mine to Russia's Nord Gold, covering 52.8 square kilometers and valued at over $88 million. But why is Burkina Faso trusty with its gold while cutting ties with the West? Let's find out. When Burkina Faso granted a sweeping new gold mining license to Russia's Nord Gold, the world barely blinked. Yet beneath the quiet headlines, something profound was unfolding: a reconfiguration of power, loyalty, and survival. Not just for one country, but for an entire region gasping for independence from old masters. Gold has long whispered secrets through the corridors of Burkina Faso's history. Once known primarily for its cotton fields, the country has, over the past 2 decades, transformed into one of West Africa's glittering gold capitals. Buried beneath the dry Sahelian soil lies treasure that fuels not only national budgets, but also dreams of autonomy. Around 70 tons of gold now flow from Burkina Faso's mines every year, a volume powerful enough to reshape the fate of a nation if properly harnessed, or to keep it shackled if siphoned off through foreign manipulation. So when news broke that a vast 52.8 square kilometer site, known as the Neo Gold Project, had been handed over to a Russian firm, it struck a nerve that few dared to touch publicly. Officially, the deal looks straightforward. Nord Gold is expected to extract more than 22 tons of gold over an 8-year period, promising 51 billion CFA francs, around 88.7 million, to the government, and an additional 7 billion francs, approximately 12.2 million, to Burkina Faso's Mining Development Fund. The project is set to create 2,004 jobs, injecting liquidity into an economy still limping from sanctions and isolation. But real power is rarely about numbers on a page. In truth, the Nord Gold deal marks a silent yet irreversible shift away from a century of Western financial dominance toward a new model. One where the spoils of Africa might finally be negotiated on terms set by Africans themselves, or at least by allies willing to defy the Western monopoly. This is not just about gold. It is about Burkina. For decades, Burkina Faso entrusted its destiny to Western companies. French firms like Arriva and Canadian outfits like Semafo ran much of the region's mining network, repatriating profits while leaving behind more than environmental scars and broken promises of development. Western investment often meant ownership without responsibility, extraction without transformation. The gold went north, the poverty stayed south. Now, with this new license handed to Russia, a different equation is being tested. Russia does not carry the same colonial baggage that France does, and Burkina Faso's young leadership, particularly under Captain Ibrahim Traoré, is betting that a partnership with Moscow might offer more favorable and less exploitative terms. Whether that bet will pay off remains to be seen. But one thing is clear: Burkina Faso is no longer waiting for Western permission. The granting of the Neo site wasn't just an economic act. It was a declaration, a subtle but powerful challenge to a global system that has long treated African nations as chess pieces. The fact that this decision came shortly after Burkina Faso, alongside Mali and Niger, quit ECOWAS only amplifies the symbolism. After severing ties with a regional bloc seen as too cozy with Paris and Washington, Burkina Faso is now charting a course where traditional alliances no longer dictate internal policies. Nord Gold's entrance into Neo is also significant for another reason. Burkina Faso's new rulers are not afraid to bring in foreign partners, but they will choose those partners carefully, based on mutual survival rather than colonial legacy. In many ways, Russia's growing footprint in West Africa is less about expansionism and more about seizing opportunity, filling the void left by an arrogant and increasingly resented West. The Neo project also reflects a deeper domestic calculation. Captain Traoré, having come to power on promises of sovereignty and real wealth for Burkinab citizens, needs victories, tangible victories. He cannot afford to be seen as just another leader mouthing slogans while allowing outsiders to loot national treasures. Delivering large-scale, revenue-generating projects without bowing to IMF austerity, World Bank preconditions, or ECOWAS interference is critical to sustaining both his legitimacy and the revolutionary spirit that propelled him into office. Yet, there are risks. Nordgold itself has faced allegations of opaque practices in other African states. Russian firms, like their Western counterparts, are not charities. They pursue profits. The key difference, for now, is that Russia is perceived by Sahelian leaders as a geopolitical counterweight, not an imperial overlord. The balance Burkina Faso must strike is delicate, maximizing the benefits of Russian partnership without trading one form of dependency for another. As bulldozers begin to tear into the new soil, extracting gold dust that may shape the nation's future, one truth becomes clear. Burkina Faso is no longer just mining for wealth, it is mining for freedom. Whether this newfound path leads to prosperity or fresh pitfalls remains to be seen. But make no mistake, the ground has already shifted here. Why does this deal matter so much for Burkina Faso? Before we continue, please like and share the video, and subscribe to our channel for more content. Let's continue. The world sees gold and immediately thinks of wealth, markets, and numbers. But for Burkina Faso, especially now, gold has become something far more powerful and far more dangerous. It is no longer just a source of revenue. It is a weapon in a war for sovereignty, a silent battle for dignity. Gold, once a glittering curse that drew colonizers like moths to flame, now sits at the center of a new kind of liberation struggle. Captain Ibrahim Traoré and the military leaders around him understand this better than most Western politicians. Perhaps because they have no choice. In Burkina Faso today, control over gold means control over survival itself. That's why the neo-license granted to Nordgold must be viewed not through the narrow lens of mining contracts, but through the far broader lens of statecraft. Burkina Faso is not simply selling minerals, it is trying to buy back its future. It's important to understand that Burkina Faso is fighting multiple wars at once, and only one of them involves bullets. Since 2015, the country has been under siege from insurgencies, with vast rural areas slipping out of government control. In many villages, gold mining, artisanal, dangerous, and often illegal, became the only source of income for desperate communities, abandoned by both the state and international donors. Insurgent groups quickly understood the value of gold. Almost instinctively, they attacked mines, seized smuggling routes, and extorted local miners to fund their operations. In some regions, the fight for gold is more vicious than the fight for ideology. Whoever controls the gold controls power, weapons, and recruitment. For the new leadership in Ouagadougou, this reality changed everything. Gold was no longer just about boosting GDP or paying civil servant salaries. It became the lifeblood that could either strengthen a fragile state or fatally bleed it dry. Handing over the Neo mine to Nordgold, then, is part of a much larger strategy to formalize, secure, and nationalize the flow of wealth so that it strengthens state authority rather than fuels rebellion. A mine operated under strict agreements, paying fixed revenues into government coffers, is infinitely preferable to dozens of shadowy, insurgent, taxed artisanal sites operating beyond the law. In this sense, Neo is not just a business venture. It is a defensive fortress, a claim of ownership, not just over the land, but over the right to define Burkina Faso's destiny. But there is a second, even deeper layer at play: the psychological war. For generations, Burkina's citizens grew up hearing the same cynical story, that their riches would always be stolen, whether by colonial powers, multinational corporations, or corrupt elites. The land was rich, but the people were poor. A brutal paradox that bred fatalism, despair, and migration. By aggressively asserting control over new mining deals, and by choosing partners like Russia, who are seen as challengers to the old Western order, Traoré is trying to rewrite that story. He is offering the youth something infinitely more valuable than gold bars: hope. A vision where Burkina Faso can keep what it produces, chart its own economic destiny, and stop begging foreign powers for aid disguised as charity. There are echoes here of Thomas Sankara, Burkina Faso's revolutionary hero of the 1980s, who once thundered, who feeds you, controls you. Today, Traoré's government seems to be operating under a similar principle. He who mines for you owns you. It's not a coincidence that gold overtook cotton as Burkina Faso's top export during the very same years political instability spiked. Cotton, a crop that requires stable governance, infrastructure, and long-term investment, suffered in chaos. Gold, by contrast, can be dug out of the ground with a pickaxe, a shovel, and a Kalashnikov. It is the perfect commodity for both insurgents and governments alike. Fast, flexible, and fiercely contested. What Burkina Faso is attempting now is to move from a gold economy of survival to a gold economy of sovereignty. That is a perilous transition. Formalizing the gold sector risks alienating small-scale miners, many of whom survive outside any regulatory system. It risks attacks from armed groups who see formal mines as high-value targets. It risks pushback from international watchdogs and NGOs, many of which accuse Russia of resource exploitation in other countries. But it also offers a chance to build something that has eluded Burkina Faso since independence, an economy that serves Burkinab citizens first, rather than foreign shareholders. The Neo mine is only one piece of that puzzle. It is a bold experiment. Can a nation once stripped of its wealth now use that same wealth to buy back its freedom? If it succeeds, the story of Burkina Faso may not just change, it may inspire the entire Sahel. Now let's talk about influence. If gold is the lifeblood of Burkina Faso's new economy, then influence is the silent weapon shaping its political survival. The new mining deal with Russia's Nord Gold was not just about extracting metal from the ground. This wasn't just about gold. It was about shifting the entire center of gravity in the Sahel's geopolitical war zone. In today's world, contracts speak louder than speeches, and the ink on Burkina Faso's mining licenses is beginning to redraw alliances in ways that even bullets cannot. For decades, France was the unchallenged power broker across West Africa. Its security agreements, currency control through the CFA franc, and a tightly knit network of elites ensured that Paris's shadow loomed over every major economic and political decision in the region. When Burkina Faso's previous governments sought military aid against insurgents or financial assistance for infrastructure, they turned to France, the World Bank, or ECOWAS-backed institutions. Aid came, but with strings so tightly wound that sovereignty became little more than an illusion. That era is dying. By offering Nord Gold a major stake in one of its richest, previously untapped mining zones, Burkina Faso has made a clear statement. It is no longer playing by the unwritten rulebook drafted in Paris or Brussels. It is writing a new one, where Russia, not France, stands at its side, at least for now, and Moscow understands the stakes perfectly. Russia's strategy in Africa is not built on vast colonial administrations or sprawling foreign military bases. It is rooted in something far simpler, and arguably far more durable loyalty earned through survival. In countries like the Central African Republic, Sudan, Mali, and now Burkina Faso, Moscow has stepped in precisely where Western support collapsed, offering security partnerships, military advisors, and, crucially, unrestricted economic deals. Burkina Faso's pivot to Russia is no accident. It reflects a cold calculation that has been brewing for years. When survival is on the line, ideological purity is a luxury no leader can afford. Captain Ibrahim Traoré and his government are not naive or revolutionaries chasing Cold War nostalgia. They are pragmatists navigating a chessboard where every piece is stained with blood. The Neo license is one tile in a larger mosaic. In parallel to mining deals, Burkina Faso has deepened military cooperation with Russia, signing defense pacts that include intelligence sharing, arms deliveries, and joint training operations. These agreements, often sealed behind closed doors, are designed to fortify the junta not only against insurgents, but against any external threat that might seek to destabilize its rule under the banner of restoring democracy. And here lies the irony. While Western governments loudly denounce coups and authoritarianism, it was years of broken promises and conditional aid that did more to pave the way for Traoré's rise than any Russian conspiracy ever could. In the dusty towns and battered cities of Burkina Faso, people are not debating whether Moscow's presence upholds liberal values. They are asking a far more immediate and brutal question: who will stand by us when the guns are pointed at our homes? France left. ECOWAS failed. Russia arrived. The new gold deals, Nord Gold at Neo and earlier, Nord Gold at MGU, are the economic cement binding this emerging political alliance. They ensure that Russia's stake in Burkina Faso is not just ideological but material. The profits from gold mining tether Moscow's interests directly to the survival of the Burkina state, and vice versa. In a world where alliances built on ideology collapse with every election cycle, alliances built on shared survival are far harder to break. Critics argue that Burkina Faso is simply trading one foreign master for another. But on the ground, the perception is different. Many Burkinabes see the Russian partnership not as submission, but as correction. A realignment that finally places Ouagadougou in a position to negotiate, not beg. Of course, such a gamble is not without risks. Russia, like any major power, pursues its own interests first. If Moscow's attention wanes, or if internal challenges divert its resources away from Africa, Burkina Faso could find itself exposed once again. Moreover, dependence on a single partner, even a more sympathetic one, comes with its own vulnerabilities. But for now, the strategy is clear. Burkina Faso is fortifying its house with Russian brick and Burkinabe mortar. Gold is flowing, guns are loaded, and new maps are being drawn, not with treaties, but with contracts and cargo planes. And the question haunting every Western capital, from Paris to Washington, is chillingly simple: what if it works? What if, despite sanctions, diplomatic isolation, and dire predictions, Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger succeed in building a new bloc? A coalition fueled by their own resources, defended by non-Western partners, and immune to the old puppeteer strings of the global order. If that happens, the new gold mine won't just be a site of extraction. It will be the spark that ignites a revolution larger than any battlefield victory. A revolution not of ideology, but of independence. Because the real story of Burkina Faso's Nord Gold deal doesn't end at the EW mine. It doesn't even end with the Russian defense treaties or the exit from ECOWAS. Those are just the opening moves. The true stakes are far greater. Captain Ibrahim Traoré's government isn't merely trying to survive the next year. They are quietly testing whether an entirely new model for Africa is possible. It's a dangerous, breathtaking gamble, and everyone is watching. At its core, Burkina Faso is betting that sovereignty can be rebuilt, not through slogans or endless appeals to global sympathy, but by controlling the most brutal forces that govern the modern world: money, security, and resources. Traoré is wagering that if his country can command its gold, defend its soil without foreign bases, and negotiate partnerships on equal footing, then true independence, the dream so many African nations proclaimed when the flags rose in the 1960s but never fully achieved, might finally be within reach. But building that model is like crossing a battlefield blindfolded. Every move brings danger. First, there's the economic challenge. Burkina Faso's reliance on gold is both a blessing and a curse. Gold provides fast revenue, but it is a volatile resource. A collapse in global prices could cripple the government's budget overnight. More dangerously, an economy rooted too heavily in a single commodity is fragile, vulnerable to manipulation by external forces, whether through Western sanctions or Russian overreach. To truly turn gold into a tool of freedom, rather than another chain of dependency, Burkina Faso must invest aggressively in diversification, agriculture, manufacturing, energy. That transition will not be easy, and enemies, both inside and outside the country, would love to see it fail. Second, there is the security reality. Striking deals with Russia might bring arms, training, and intelligence for now, but Burkina Faso is still bleeding under insurgent attacks in its countryside. Winning battles over mines does not automatically reclaim lost villages or restore trust among terrified communities. A gold mine protected by mercenaries is not a substitute for state legitimacy, not if the government cannot deliver schools, clinics, and jobs. Beyond the cities, in the war-torn peripheries, no amount of mining revenue will save the nation in the long run unless it reaches the people who need it most. Third, there is the threat of regional blowback. Burkina Faso's withdrawal from ECOWAS alongside Mali and Niger set off alarm bells across Africa. Some governments sympathize quietly, seeing in this Sahel alliance a glimpse of a future based on self-rule. But others, especially coastal states still tethered to Western systems, see it as a dangerous contagion. If Traoré's model succeeds, it could inspire similar uprisings elsewhere, shattering the fragile balance of African geopolitics. If it fails, it will be weaponized as proof that Africans still need Western oversight, reinforcing the very chains Burkina Faso is trying to break. Fourth, and perhaps most dangerously, internal collapse. Revolutions are easy to proclaim, but hard to govern. Today, many Burkinabe are willing to endure hardship for the sake of dignity and autonomy. But what about 2 years from now? If jobs haven't materialized, if violence spreads, if the promised fruits of gold wealth are lost to bureaucracy or corruption? Popular patience, even when fueled by patriotism, is not infinite. Traoré's greatest threat may not come from Paris or Washington, or even Moscow, but from the anger of his own people if expectation outpaces delivery. And yet, despite all these dangers, there is something undeniably electrifying about what Burkina Faso is attempting. In a world where most nations drift helplessly between superpowers, here is a small, battered country in the heart of Africa, daring to redraw the lines, daring to say no to old masters, daring to bet on itself. The new mining license, seen through this lens, is not just about gold. It is a test of whether true sovereignty is still possible in the 21st century. A test of whether natural resources can be harnessed without surrendering to the corporations that circle Africa like vultures. A test of whether security can be built without becoming a client state. A test of whether a people, long robbed of their destiny, can reclaim it through grit, force, and ruthless strategic calculation. Burkina Faso is walking a tightrope, where every misstep could be fatal. But every step forward also lights a path that others might one day follow. If Traoré can transform gold wealth into real development, not just mining towns, but roads, factories, schools, he will have done more than resist Western pressure. He will have built a template for African renaissance, one no amount of media smearing or diplomatic condemnation could erase. It will not be easy. It may not even be fair. The obstacles are immense, the dangers many. But for the first time in decades, the question facing Burkina Faso is not whether it can survive under someone else's rules. It's whether it can win by writing its own. And for a people long taught that their fate was decided elsewhere, even that question itself is already a revolution. Do you think Burkina Faso will fail? Will Traoré let his people down? Let us know in the comments. Want more videos like this one? Subscribe to our channel and hit the bell icon. We're telling the stories no one else will. Black rebellion, black existence, black untold history. Stay tuned.